Hello everybody, the FPS Tester here, and welcome to a brand new series. This series is going to be called Can It Stream? The purpose of this series is going to be to figure out whether or not a PC can stream on Twitch and YouTube reliably with said games. To start this series, we're going to be starting out with Medieval Dynasty, and we're going to be testing it today with the i7 4790K and the GTX 1650. Before we get into the game and the game settings, let me go ahead and show you how we're actually streaming. Let's head on over to the settings. First setting that I do want to show you is under the advanced tab, and it's the process priority. Always set this to high because you want your game to start lagging before your stream does. That way you can very easily tell if you're not able to stream because your game will be having issues before your OBS in most cases. Other than that, let's go to video. I have the canvas set to 1080p, but today we're just going to be focusing on 1080p because I am going to be testing this on Twitch and I'm going to be streaming over on YouTube to see if there is any performance difference because we are streaming at a much higher bitrate. So to get this started, I'm streaming on Twitch first. I am using the Nvenc encoder. Bitrate, I am testing it at 8,000 kilobits per second, just in case, there's people out there who are partnered or want to just stream at the higher bitrate anyway. So we're just going to be testing it with 8,000 kilobits per second. Keyframe interval set to 2. Preset, we've got it on the highest quality, which is P7. Multipass mode, 2 passes, full resolution. Look ahead is turned off. It's very hit or miss. Sometimes it makes your stream look much better in specific games. Sometimes it doesn't do anything, it seems. So I would recommend that you use this and then turn it off and just look at your own video. Do a recording with it or do a stream with it. Look at the results for your specific game that you play and just compare the two images. We've got psychovisual tuning also turned on. This also increases GPU utilization, but it does make your stream look better when there's a lot of motion going on. So I would recommend leaving that on. As for audio, I've got the audio bitrate set to 320. So just want to point that out. So now that we've got the settings out of the way, let's get into the game and start test streaming. But before we do that, I am going to turn off the preview because it does use extra system resources, and we'll start the stream. And I'm also going to minimize OBS. Right, so we're in the game. I do want to quickly talk about the Nvenc stat that I am actively recording here as well. As you can see, it's near the bottom of the GPU, and that is essentially the Nvenc chip that we're using to stream. Now this is important because if you get to 100% usage with this, you will experience encoding overload basically. So you never want your Nvenc to go above 90 to 95%. Ideally you want to keep it below 90% to prevent overloading or encoding overloading. And because we're only streaming at 1080p, you can see even using almost the highest settings for streaming, we only had one setting turned off and everything else was set to the highest for encoding for this stream at 1080p, 60 FPS. And as you can see, we're only using about 40% of the Nvenc chip. You don't really have to worry about Nvenc overloading unless you stream at a very high resolution, such as 4K at 30 or 60 FPS with really high settings. You could experience encoding overload at that point, but realistically with a 1650 you're not going to stream at that resolution, at least not on one PC. And also if you are recording, let's say at 1440p with very high settings while streaming at 1440p with very high settings, then you may experience Nvenc overload as well. So they're very niche use cases, but it can happen where you overload your Nvenc encoder and you will start to experience a lot of lag on your stream. But at 1080p you should be able to record and stream at 60 FPS 1080p highest settings and have no overloading with Nvenc basically. So for 1080p it's pretty much a non-factor, but it is interesting to see because it will fluctuate depending on the game that you're playing and also what's happening in that game. So for example, if I was playing a very fast-paced game, my Nvenc chip would be using more resources because of the fact that it's got more to encode. There's a lot more going on essentially to really simplify it. And the 1650 here is pretty much always maxed out. I'm in a town because it is more demanding to be inside of a town. So I'm just inside like the starting village. There's a lot more going on here. It's also very demanding on the CPU as well to be inside of a town rather than just in the middle of nowhere by myself. And as you can see, the GPU is always pretty much maxed out here. And as for VRAM usage, we've got just a little bit left. We're using 3.5 gigs out of 4 gigs. So it's not too terrible there either. As you can see for the CPU, we're at about 60% usage, which is pushing it for the i7 for sure, because just because we're using 60% doesn't mean we've got 40% more leeway. That's just not how it works. We will test the CPU in just a moment. We'll see how many frames we could get with this CPU while streaming. 1% loads, we're at about 51. So it's not the most smooth experience, but then again, it's not terrible at the same time. You can see the frame time graph there. Average FPS just under 70, which is totally fine. Remember, we are playing at high settings. One thing that you do have to remember when you stream is you want to stream at really high settings usually, because most people don't want to look at an ugly stream. Unless it's a competitive game, then people don't care as much. You know, if you're streaming something like Dota or StarCraft, something like that, maybe people don't care as much. But for a casual stream or a casual game, people want the stream to look good, so you have to play at higher settings, which is why I'm not testing lower settings for this. Essentially, ultra, we will dip down into the low 50s. I've already tested it, so pretty much high settings is where it's at. And of course, you can go ahead and feel free to adjust settings however you see fit as well. But yeah, now we're gonna go ahead and test out the CPU. All right, now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the CPU. We're going to see how much FPS this CPU can actually achieve inside of the game. Maybe you've got a better GPU, or you're thinking about getting a better GPU. How much FPS can this CPU push at stock settings, essentially? So to do this, I'm going to lower my graphical preset down to low. I'm also going to reduce my resolution to 600 by 900. And we're basically going to keep lowering the resolution until we see the GPU start to drop in usage, and then that lets me know that we are at a CPU limitation. So we're at low settings now with 1600 by 900. Remember, the purpose of this part of the benchmark is to actually test the CPU, which is still pretty much maxing out the GPU for the most part. So we're actually going to go ahead and lower the resolution. We'll turn down the AA as well. We'll turn that off, actually. So we'll lower this down to, we'll try it at 1024 by 768. Don't even know what that resolution is, but we'll give that a try. Game looks terrible. Obviously, you would never stream like this. The purpose of this is not to see how good the game looks. Yeah, we're CPU bound now. About 70% usage, just a little bit above that. We're in the city or the town, and GPU usage has gone down, so we are at a CPU bottleneck right now at about 110 FPS, which is really, really good for a game like this. So anything for me, I normally play at 144 Hertz refresh rate. So anything for me with a game like this, if it's at 70 to 75 FPS, it feels totally fine to me, because it's so slow paced that I don't need a really high refresh rate experience. And so 75 Hertz or 75 FPS is more than playable for a game like this. And as you can see, this CPU, even while we're streaming, yes, we're streaming with Nvenc, but still, even while we're streaming, can push 110 plus frames. That is crazy. And we're in the town as well, which is the most CPU intensive areas. So if you are interested in streaming this game and you got this CPU, maybe you don't have the best GPU, this CPU can do it, which is very nice to see. Minimize this. We'll look at our OBS. As you can see, I am streaming it. We had 0 drop frames. It did just start skipping frames. This always happens when you open OBS and yada yada. But you saw when I first opened it, we didn't drop any frames. Now, for the last part of this video, we're going to go ahead and switch over to YouTube streaming, because I want to see if YouTube streaming will have a much worse performance, because it is at a much higher bit rate. So now we are on the YouTube streaming. Quickly show you my YouTube streaming settings. They're the exact same as the Twitch streaming settings. Now, what you can actually do with YouTube is you can stream with HEVC, which is actually a better encoder. So we'll set that up real quick. It is a better setting to stream at. You get higher quality. Again, you can stream at 51,000, but I'm leaving some headway for the audio because I'm not sure if the audio bitrate is included in YouTube's 51,000. So just to play it safe, I'm streaming at 50,000. Keyframe interval set to 2. Quality set to 7. We'll go ahead and stream at full resolution 2-pass, and this is pretty much the same settings that we had for Twitch. So let's go ahead and start streaming again. We're now streaming to YouTube. Let's go ahead and head back on in the game and see if we're actually losing any performance compared to streaming on Twitch at 8,000 kbs per second. So we're back in the game. I'm still on the same settings that we tried originally with Twitch, which is 1080p, all high settings, that sort of good stuff. And you can see that instantly. Do you see that? The Nvenc usage is way higher, 84%, 90%. As you can see, the 1650 is once again maxed out. We're at about 70 FPS in the town, in the city. VRAM usage exact same. You would expect it to be. The RAM usage pretty much exact same. CPU usage, interestingly, is also pretty much identical, 55 to 60% usage. The only thing that has increased significantly is Nvenc. And by the way, I do want to quickly say that this is still totally fine. We're at 80% Nvenc usage, and this game is definitely one of the more demanding Nvenc games because of this This is literally why the Nvenc is using so much performance. So as you move around and so on, when there's a lot of foliage in a game like this, it requires a lot more performance from the Nvenc chip to make this look good, essentially, to really simplify what it's doing. If I stand still and I look at the floor, you'll see the Nvenc usage will drop because there's nothing updating. There's nothing new to update, really. So the Nvenc usage is dropping here because there's not too much happening. The only thing that's really going on right now that's changing is that shadow's flickering a little bit and the grass and those bushes are moving a little bit. There's not a lot to update, essentially. Whereas if I look at these trees and I'm moving, there's a lot for the Nvenc chip to actually work with here. And so the usage goes up quite significantly. If I just look at the ceiling, look at the sky, it should again drop. And this is why it's important to have the correct settings for your encoder, because it will fluctuate. It doesn't just sit at the same usage, it does fluctuate depending on what's going on. So that's why you can be playing a game one day and it's working totally fine, then play another game and it's like you're having all these encoding issues and so on and so forth. So it's always a good idea to load up your most graphically intensive game that you have and go ahead and mess around in that. So any game with a lot of trees and grass and so on, just load that game up and that will probably be the best test that you can do for your encoding. I am just running around here. We are dropping, interestingly, to 50s. We're dropping into the 50s. This is my little town here that I've started. Brand new player to the game. So we're dropping to 50 FPS here, 47. Interestingly, dropping more FPS here than the town. It doesn't feel too stuttery. The frame time graph, I was going to say, was pretty good. And then out of nowhere, we got a huge stutter. There's a deer there. It's the first deer I've ever seen. I've never seen a deer in this game, and you probably can't even see it because it's so pixelated. I got a rabbit. I'll harvest that later, but it's totally fine. There's not really much more to test here. You can decide for yourself whether or not this is going to be playable for you. I would say it is. I would go into the settings personally and adjust some of them down even more, because you can really mess around with them, but for the purposes of the video, to keep it simple, I'm not going to do that. We're going to again test the CPU, but there should be no difference because we're not really doing anything differently other than encoding. It's just an encoding difference. As you can see, we're at about 100 FPS. We have lost some frames. There is some FPS loss streaming at this higher bitrate for sure. Or is there? It's pretty much identical. We're at 110. No, it feels pretty similar in terms of FPS. So yeah, there's no difference. The only difference between streaming on Twitch and YouTube, because you should be using more bitrate on YouTube, is you're just going to see Nvenc encoding a lot more. But as long as you stay below 90% and definitely don't hit 95 to 100%, your stream should not be lagging. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll actually quickly check OBS. Boom. As you can see, no encoding lag, even on YouTube. Totally fine. It's more than playable, guys. These are pretty much the highest settings that you're going to be able to use on YouTube. So for the absolute final part of this video, we're going to test look ahead turned on. This is the highest settings that you can get with the Nvenc encoder with this GPU. These are the highest settings. P7, 2 passes, full resolution, look ahead turned on, psycho visual tuning turned on. We're at 51,000 kbs per second, right? We're at the absolute highest. Maybe I can set this to 51,000. I don't know if the audio bitrate is separate on YouTube. I don't know. So to play it safe, I'm going to leave 320 kbs per second for the audio, just in case. So these are the highest settings. We've got look ahead turned on. I don't know how much of a difference it will make. You won't be able to see it in the video because I'm not using the stream footage. I am using just the recording. So keep that in mind. So we'll start the recording. We'll start the stream and let's get on into the game. Okay, so we're in the game. I've set the graphics back to 1080p. We're on the high settings again. And now the only difference is we're using look ahead. And the encoder looks about the same. We're at about 80%, so it doesn't look like the encoder's gone up. Our FPS, I definitely feel like we have lost some frames. You do lose some FPS with look ahead turned on for sure. Yeah, VRAM's pretty much the same. Nvenc encoding pretty much looks the same. CPU usage is actually about the same, I would say, when we're out in the middle of nowhere. RAM usage, interestingly, has dropped to 8.6 gigs. So we've actually dropped some RAM usage. 1% lows have definitely decreased, and my average FPS has definitely decreased. This might look like I've lost a ton of performance because I have, in all honesty. You'll have to decide whether or not it is worth it to you to use look ahead. It's such a funny setting because sometimes it makes a huge difference in the visual quality of your stream for certain games, and then other times it really doesn't do anything. And also in terms of performance, sometimes it has a very minimal performance impact, and then in other cases it has a really high performance impact. So it's just a really hard setting to benchmark. So if you are experiencing a lot of performance issues with it turned on, just turn it off and it'll probably fix your issues. So I'm just walking around. We're getting about 60 FPS. I'm actually dying here of food. I've been benchmarking for so long. Where's my food? Sorry, I wish I don't die here. Yeah, we're about 55, 60 FPS in the town. For me, this is totally fine. I play like this, especially if my stream looks a lot better. So even with look ahead turned on, streaming on YouTube at 50,000 kbs per second, we're doing good. I would say 40 FPS here. It's a bit rough, to be honest. 50 FPS in the water. Nvenc encoding still at about 70 to 80%, which is totally fine. The only issue that you would have streaming on YouTube is you wouldn't be able to record at the same time with 1080p, most likely. If just streaming to YouTube at 1080p 60 FPS with my settings that I've got right now is using 70 to 80% of the Nvenc chip, you actually wouldn't be able to record at 1080p 60 FPS with high settings at the same time. You actually would not be able to do it. So you would actually have to lower your streaming settings a little bit, or your bitrate for YouTube to be able to record at the same time, most likely. Again, you would have to mess around with that and figure out a sweet spot with your recording settings and streaming settings. But if you're just streaming by itself, it's totally fine. And that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you found some use out of this. Let me know what you think of this series. I'm going to continue it most likely. I just found it interesting because there's not a whole lot of content on YouTube that is specifically targeted at streaming. Essentially, like, can it stream? And I find it interesting to know if I can stream games and so on, because I am a quote-unquote streamer. I've just started streaming, and so I find it interesting to actually jump in and have a look at what my old gaming PC, because it's my old gaming rig, is capable of still. So yeah, I hope you find this interesting. I've been the FPS tester, also known as Verda, which is my actual online name, and I'll see you next time. So let me know what you think of this series in the comments. Did I miss anything? Would you like to see some more information? Let me know, because at the end of the day, I make these videos for you. So thanks for watching. I've been Verda. Take care. Also, almost forgot, want to quickly point out, this is the YouTube encoding that I just did with look ahead turned on. I'll quickly show you, because I almost forgot to show you this. So yeah, look ahead's turned on. This is literally the stream that I just did, and it's no drop frames. So even the encoder hitting 70-80%, totally fine. Bye.